So we're up to Shin Tzadi Aleph Sif Beis. Says the Mechaber, Yisraelim Hadarim B'chotzer Yechidi. So you've got Jews living in one chotzer, Be'ir Shalenim Yehudim, in a non-Jewish city, She Mukefes Chema, which has a wall around it. Va'avru Yehudim Acherim Derech Sham B'Shabbos. And other Jewish people, they arrive there on Shabbos, V'nis Achsanu B'chotzer Acheres, and they're guests in a different chotzer. Einam oishim aleihem. They don't asa. The Orach eina oiser, because a guest doesn't asa. He's only a temporary resident. Umutarim letaltel b'chol, and therefore it's as if they're not there, and therefore the Jews in one city, in one chotzer, are considered like one person, and therefore they can carry in the whole city, which is mukaf chayma. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Sif Katan Yutes, Yisraelim hadarim pirush af shekama Yisraelim darim b'chotzer. Even though you've got one chotzer of Yisraelim in a non-Jewish city, but then there may be many Yisraelim in that chotzer. Mekol makom mutarim hoyu lahitzi mechotzer mevuz shaleir. Del inyan shetuvim mevuz kol bnei chotzer kechad chashivi heicha she'irvu. This chotzer of many Yisraelim are considered like one entity, one person, and therefore if you've got one person in a city of Einam Yehudim, you're allowed to carry it because as long as it's Mukav Chayma. Says the Mishnah Berurah, She Mukefes Chayma, Dali Deizeh, Einat Shricha Eit Shum Tikun, because if it's Mukav Chayma, you don't need any other repair, any other amendment. V'uadin im Einam Mukefes Chayma, V'asuyo B'tikun Mevuas Kadin. And so too, even if it's not Mukav Chayma, as long as you fix it up in some other way. Okay, and then the problem is that some other Yisraelim, they show up in town on Shabbos or before Shabbos, and they're guests. Even if it's not Mukaf in a different chotzer, even if it's in that chotzer itself, v'gam akum darsham, even if an akum lives there, well, the inyan tiltule ba'isa chotzer atzma to mutarim shnehem af b'li eirav or b'li schiras v'shuz min akum mihai timer, and we just ignore them. Einam oisrim rotzalema da'after kaimalon she'im shnei Yisraelim dar be'ir. Even though we hold that if there are two Yisraelim who live in one city, v'yesham gam akum hadar be'ir, and there's another non-Jewish person there, the only solution is to be soiche rishus from this akum. Hacha the einam ele archims. Here the other group of Yisraelim are considered as they are archim, but tzili legabi Yisrael kavua ba'israel, they are considered bottle to those Yisraelim who are kavua, who are resident there. V'imkein ein kanel Yisrael echad, and therefore you're back to the original situation where there's one Yisrael in a city of Einam Yehudim, and therefore it's Mukav Chayma, and therefore there's one Yisrael, there's no problem, they can carry in the whole city. Not only them, but even the guests who have rocked up, they can also carry in the whole city. That even though the Orachim don't asa on the balabais, but the balabais is kavua, and therefore he asas on the Orachim to prevent the Orachim from carrying from their homes into the city. However, that even the Orachim are allowed to carry, and that's the shitta of the Shulchan Aruch. And certainly they can carry in the chotzer where they're residing, where they are guests. And they don't asa on each other. And certainly they're going to be toffel to the balabais, who is a regular fixed resident there. Venira, the Davka Kashem Kefes Chayma. Davka, again, we're talking about a situation of a city with a chayma, a wall all the way around it. Oisha Asu Katikun, a Bitikun Erevin Kadin, or it's been fixed up properly, however way, with Suras HaPesach, whatever it is. The Chashivi Kulor Chotzer Achaz, that is considered one chotzer. Di Lav Hochi, Lo Betili Legab Yisrael, Shedar B'chotzer Acheres. They're not bottled to them, and they would in fact restrict. That which we say that an Orach it doesn't asa, that he's not a regular guest. But if he's a regular, there's like a fair, there's a business fair where people come on a regular basis, then they're not considered guests anymore. They're considered a regular arrangement. For Miyad, Shama, then they're going to ask it straight away. Then unless they're there for 30 days, they still retain the status as a guest, and we can be makel. In fact, in 14, he says that's how the Shatzian previously paskins, that we can be makel, that even if they come on a regular basis, they've got a din of an achsanoi, and therefore they're bottled to the Yisraelim who are there, and no problem. And therefore Eina Oiseh. Okay, that is the end of Shin Tzadi Aleph. Let's carry on. Shin Tzadi Beis. So Dinei Eruvin Le'ir. Now we're talking about an Eruv for a city. Ir, says the Mechaber, Shehoysa Kinyan Yochit. Now this is talking about a privately owned city. Afilu Nasis Shel Rabim, even if it later becomes a city of Rabim, Mishtatvim Kulam Shutuf Echod, you're allowed to make one shutuf, and you can carry it in the whole city, in the whole place. So too, if it belonged to the Rabbim, and there was only one entrance to this city, you can make one shituf in the whole thing. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kinyan Echod, Kinyan Yochid, Pirush. How do you have that situation? You get one guy who's who bought some real estate and some fields or whatever, and he builds a city, V'hiskil Rabbim, and then he rents it out to other people, or he just builds up a city, and he keeps for himself, pathways and all these sort of stadiums and things like that. Whatever these things are, open areas. Like kings do, they have these lots of enclosures and things like that, which they as part of their grand residence. Even if he were to sell it to the Rabbim, even though he sold it and technically it belongs to the Rabbim, so long as his name has not sort of been forgotten from it, it still has the din of an ir shel yochid. Afilu nas shel Rabbim, says Mishnah Berurah, Sif Cotton Base. Afilu yesh lo shnei psachim, even if it has now two entrances, shram nechnasim bezu v'yotzim bezu, still they can do shituf echad bedafka. Since it really initially belonged to one person, it's like one big chotzer, that all the people just are joining in this one chotzer. Once you fixed up all the other mavos, you do a lechi and or a tzuras pesach, whatever it is, at the entrance of each one, that enables them to carry throughout the town. Pesach echad. The whole tam shetzorich shir be'ir shel Rabbim, we'll see soon. The whole reason why you've got to leave over a little bit of the part of the city which belongs to the Rabbim, shelo yishtatfu kulam biyachad, that you can't do it biyachad, v'yuchelim netalta b'kulei chudei lekamei, is kadei shelo yishtakach teres rishus Rabbim, that people shouldn't forget what the din of is a rishus Rabbim. But in this situation where you've got a privately owned city, there's only got one entrance, or mitzad hasheni histum, on the other side it's closed. Lo domi l'rishus Rabbim v'dina kachotzer. So essentially, what we're saying is that if you've got an ear which is privately owned, how do you have a privately owned city? The guy bought some real estate, he starts building,
Canary Wharf.
Canary Wharf. Why? That's.
Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
Originally he bought. I'm talking about. Was he concerned?
First of all, I don't think it was for residential use necessarily. Is it? Actually, there are apartments, plots there. Now there are, maybe. Okay, maybe. But I think nowadays.
I'm saying he bought the land.
True. Yeah, in economy that could be an initial yochid. But I think now is it nishtakeh shemai? But people know that it was Reichman. Like now today.
Not today, not. But
today, not. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Maybe.
It's not a year.
Yeah.
No, but, okay.
Yeah, okay, but either way, a guy bought real estate, and it's but it's mine. It's a shel yochid, and the point is, it hasn't got a din of rishus Rabbim, and we'll see soon. Once it has a din of rishus Rabbim, then you've got people. Chazal were worried yishtakach teres rishus Rabbim, and therefore there are certain things you got to do, as we'll see. Okay, so that's an issue with belonging to one person. Now let's carry on. Avol, the third line of the Mechaber. If, however, it was a publicly owned place, and it's got two entrances to this city, they enter one and go out to the other. Even if it later becomes a privately owned place, you're not allowed to ma'arv the entire city. You leave over one area, one place. Even one small chotze with one house in it, and then you can do a shituf on the rest. And the rest are mutzah in the whole city, apart from that little area which they excluded. And those that were left out are okay in that place, in that little chotzer, wherever they did, they're in the shituf they make for themselves. And if the rest are rabbim, if there are lots of other people in that little area which they left, they cannot carry in the rest of the city. Like I said before, the whole thing is a heker. That to remind them that the Eruv allows them to carry in an ear where Rabbim Baikim Bob, because it's called two entrances, because in the place where you left over, only these people can carry it for themselves, and the other people can carry it for themselves. But that will be a reminder for them. We don't want people to forget the concept of Rishus Harabim. It's interesting, this concept of Shlei Shtakhu that Rabbi Leff once told me that when he built the Eruv in Miami originally, the first Eruv in Miami many years ago, he once in a while he would puzzle it. He would say that it's not functioning this Shabbos, because he didn't want people to forget there's an Issa called Hotzah. I remember here in Northwest London, years ago before the Eruv, that I remember sometimes seeing Israelis walking down Gold's Green Road carrying talis bags and whatever. They just weren't aware there's a concept. Either they didn't know there was a concept of Hitzah, or they didn't know that there's a possibility that there's a town doesn't have an Eruv. Which town doesn't have an Eruv? So this concept of Shlei Tishtakach is quite real. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah Sivkot and Vav Afilu Shel Yochid Shemachru Aloi. So the Rabbi, it was the other way around. The Rabbim sold it to this individual. Ein Ma'arvenes Kula Gezeira Shematachse V'Tasar Rabbim. Because it might, even though it's now privately owned, maybe it will revert to be publicly owned. And people will be makel. Nowadays, people are not particularly worried about this. Even if it's an Irshal Rabbim, maybe the reason why we're not so familiar with this particular halacha and it's not common is that his definition of Rishus Rabbim is you've got to have 600,000 people, as discussed previously. B'shitov she'osim asim hoyin nisharim rabim kach tzorech loyme v'ach kach garsinan v'asurim letaltel b'vav v'asurim. Okay, rabim de'im ashiu rak le'echot. If they leave over one little area, which is just one person, ein tzrichin shitov, then doesn't need a shitov. Kadei sheyedu. The idea is that people will know. Aval im lo hayu tzrichin l'shaya hayu ha'eruv mishtakeach. But if they didn't leave, if Imlo Yitzrich in the Shaya, then people will forget this idea of Eruv. People will forget the concept of Rosh Hashanah. That they see people are carrying in the city, which looks very Rosh Hashanah like, and that's the concern. Whether or not Botei Ha'akum is considered the proper shiur, in this respect, the Yesh De'ez ben HaPoiskim v'toiv lahachmir. Okay, back to the Mechaber, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down. V'imrotzu la'orev mavu b'fnei atzma. If you want to make an Eruv for each mavu by itself, kol shkein t'mahani, that certainly works. De'ein shir godel mizeh. That's a great shir. That's a very clear reminder that there is a problem of Hitzah, etc. Says the Ramah, Haggah, v'tzorich sheyasu b'neihem shnei pasim, v'shel shnei mashu. And you've got to make two pasim with thin strips. Imhu roch of es amas, if the opening is more than 10 amas, or v'yesem es tzorich tzorich pesach. If it's more than 10, you need tzorich pesach. Now, we'll see what that's going on. Yud Aleph, says the Mishnah Berurah, v'imrotzu la'arev, hainu l'shatev, v'tzorich sheyasu b'neihem. The ilav hochi have a paritz l'mokam ha'osolo, because otherwise it's going to be open to a place where they can't carry. Shnei mashruyim, 2 thin strips of pasin. V'uadin im oisem matzeva al oisem mokam lechalik. And matzeva we'll see in Sif Dalet, Korein Mavur Mashiach Sif Dalet, is like this big block of stone. That can be a reminder as well. Avul belechi v'keira loy mahani lachalik. But a lech and a keira will not be sufficient. For kos v'achreinim, the high Haggah, this line of the Ramah, Lo koya adina de samachla. It's not going on the bit immediately before it. Dimrotz la'arev mavim mavim v'atzmai. That i.e. that if you want to make a mavim mavim from the atzmai, to bezev vada sagi belechi v'ker, because that for sure a lechin v'ker will be sufficient. She b'seif ha'mavu at the end of the mavu sheles ha'mavuos acheres, they won't asa other mavuos. Kiven dehu ir shel rabim v'lehuglu b'yachad me'olam, that they weren't. It belongs to like a publicly owned city, and people weren't used to sort of joining it all together. And the koyat el, the Ramah is going on the bit before it. Sheshir b'mavu gufa bias v'chotza achas, where you leave over a bias and a chotzer in this city. Valzeh magia Ramah, and on that point, the Ramah comments and says, "Shetzorech sham be'emtza hamavui b'makom sheshir lasis shnei pasin." On that area, you need to have two pasin. V'lo sagi sham belechi v'keir. It's not sufficient to have a lech and a keir. Kimin dehurgulu ba sham b'yachad. Because people are accustomed to it, so you need something a bit more than a lech and a kura, and you need these shnei pasin, or if it's bigger than 10 amas, you need a tzuras pesach. Okay, good. That's a good place to stop.